Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining me again. If you haven't already, make sure you are following this podcast so you never miss a new episode. Also, join us on the social media platform of your choice and engage in the conversations. And if this still isn't enough, feel free to subscribe to our bonus episodes on Spotify or Patreon. Your donation goes a long way for us to continue working for you. Now, in this week's episode, we will be looking into the small town of Mulbury. A very curious town, where the dead seem to outnumber the living, or so we would think. With their massive cemetery greeting passerbys on their drive by the old town, it would be hard to believe they had anyone still alive. I think we all know of a small town just like this. And if you close your eyes, you can almost see it. So let's listen in to Welcome to Mulbury. Here are our dead. Hello, listeners. My name is Professor Adontes Finch, and welcome to the Nightmare Trials.
Have you ever noticed that when you drive into a small rural town, the first thing you see is a cemetery? It's like, welcome to BFE, here's our dead. It's so off-putting, and really, it's no wonder why these towns stay so small. Who wants to be greeted into a town with their dead? Maybe it's the inner city kid in me, but I just don't like it. So it's no surprise that when I drove past the city limit sign for Mulbury, population of 282, the first thing I saw was a large cemetery to my right. I let out an annoyed groan. Ugh. This thing was massive and had a large worn down wrought iron fence encompassing the whole area that it possessed. The headstones in front of the cemetery looked old, like really, really old. You could see the weathering decay of the stone and the black and mossy growths encompassing the tombstones. They all seemed to stretch back as far as the eye could see, and as they did so, I could tell that the grave markers were beginning to look newer and newer, almost to the point of shining and reflecting the now setting sun's rays as they sped on by. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the splattering of large gnarled oak trees painted the scenery. As I drove, staring at the final resting place of so many individuals, I noticed a small group of people in the distance within the cemetery. They looked like shadows painted on the skyline. Some appeared to be shoveling in dirt while others just stood there, somber and unmoving. One of the figures appeared to be a smaller child, maybe a little girl. I couldn't really tell from this distance, but she appeared to be wearing a dress. Oh well, I'm sorry for whatever loss they may be going through right now, but it's a natural part of life. You're brought to life and then you die. Two of the easiest things to do. The hardest part is the in-between. The living is what sucks the most. Well, I guess unless you're born into affluence. Then you sort of have an advantage at times. I watched them as I drove, taking quick glances back at the road in front of me. I was encaptured by all of it for some reason. Then, all of a sudden and in complete unison, the shadows shot their heads in my direction. I took in a shocked breath. Their bodies slowly turned towards me as I passed by them. My body hurt from that adrenaline jolt that I just got. This had to be the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. I quickly looked away and back at the 2-lane highway I was on, and my eyes enlarged. In the middle of the damn road was the biggest brown cow I had ever seen. I slammed on my brakes and turned the wheel slightly to the right to avoid the behemoth of a beast. But but I was going too fast, and the crappy highway road that I was on was more fill tar than asphalt at this point. The back end of my car slid and I overcorrected, trying to get my back in alignment with the lane. I began to spin counterclockwise on the road, just knowing I was going to grip and flip the vehicle, or spin right into the cow. Either option was not something I could deal with or afford right now. Time began to slow down as the adrenaline in my body took control. As I spun, the landscape changed in front of me in slow, flickering movements. Open road, graveyard, cow. Open road, graveyard, cow. Oh God, I was going to slam into this fucking cow. I spun, and somehow, I spun around the animal. I don't even think I grazed it. The weirdest thing is, I think as I spun around the cow, we both had a brief moment where our eyes caught. I could almost tell that there was terror in the cow's eyes, and I was definitely sure the cow could see the terror in my eyes. I could see its pupils dilate. It had stopped chewing on whatever it had in its mouth, and I swear it had a look of pure shock on its face. You could have told me right up to this moment that animals had facial expressions, and I would have called you an idiot. But I'm a believer now. There was no longer a doubt. The cow was shitting its pants in fear just like me. By forces greater than my understanding, my car stopped its spin in the highway and came to a rest, pointing directly the way it had been going. I sat there for a minute and had a minor panic attack. I was alive. My car was fine. And the cow? I looked into my rearview mirror. Whew. Yeah, the cow was okay. And still just chilling in the middle of the road. I could see what looked like a fresh pile of crap on the road now too. I guess the cow literally shit its pants. I paused, pondering that thought, and I quickly moved my hands down to my butt. I began to pat my pants and I let out a sigh. Oh, thank God. I didn't have a second accident. I looked back at the cow and I debated getting out, trying to shoo it off the road. But I had never dealt with a cow before. I wasn't sure if they were aggressive. I mean, I have seen those videos, the ones with the running of the bull, and I wasn't about to get trampled by one of these things. Not today. So I just honked my horn to see if it would spook it. But it did nothing. The animal just turned its head towards my vehicle and stared at me. I honked again. Nothing. The cow began to chew on what it had in its mouth again. I threw my hands up in mock defeat and said, "Well, I tried." I looked over to the cemetery and noticed that the shadows I had originally seen were now gone. I wonder if they were on their way down here to make sure I was okay, or at least check on the cow. Right now, I guess the animal is not my problem anymore. I'll let them deal with it. I took my foot off the brake and began to drive. I crested a large hill and noticed that at the bottom there were construction barriers placed. They were blocking the entire shitty 2-lane highway. There was a large orange sign with an arrow pointing to the left that said detour. Well, this is fan-freaking-tastic, I said. I'm glad they're just now starting to fix this crappy road. Would have been real nice to have it fixed further up. Maybe I wouldn't have had a near-death experience. I grumbled to myself as I descended the hill and approached the road barriers. An arrow pointed me to the left down what seemed to be like a small gravel access road. I guess this leads me into good old Mulbury. My stomach grumbled. It was nearly 7 p.m. and I couldn't remember the last time I ate. Maybe there'll be a diner or something in town that I can stop off at. I can eat and let my nerves die down. Well, Mulbury, let's see what type of food you got. I took a left turn, and with that, I began to drive into town. The access road was way worse than the highway. I don't think they ever graveled this thing since the 1980s. I had to traverse around huge potholes, and there were large patches that were more dirt than gravel. Hell, I think I even passed a tree that was starting to grow in the middle of the road. And the speed limit signs, they were so damn dirty. I think they said that the speed limit here was 45 miles per hour. I'm not too sure. What I was sure of is that if anyone was going 45 on this road, they would surely end up in the ditch. 25 miles per hour was barely manageable. The 2-mile trip on the access road should have taken me a few minutes to get down, but It was a good 15 or maybe 20 minutes before I actually entered into the town of Mulbury. The gravel road sharply transitioned from the dirt and rock mix to old brick. There were sidewalks on both sides of me that were all out of sorts. They ascended and descended sharply into the dirt. Much like the neglected gravel road, these probably haven't seen any work on them for decades. They were more of a hazard than a safe place for a pedestrian to walk. Pedestrian. Wait. I had been driving on this old brick road for a mile or so, and I haven't seen a single soul. The place seemed deserted. I know the sign said the population was like 200-ish, but damn, no people out and about at all? I guess it's getting late. Maybe everyone is at home or something, settling in for the night. I looked at the houses I was passing, trying to see if anyone was in them. I just wanted to see at least one person because this was getting kind of weird, and I was beginning to freak out a bit. But every house I passed was in awful shape, to the point that they were unlivable. Some were so run down that they appeared to be on the brink of collapse. The lawns were well overgrown, and I swear I even saw a tree branch growing into someone's second-story window. Regardless, there weren't even any cars in the driveways. No lights on, and absolutely no movement. I kept driving and I saw an old weathered wooden sign that hung by one chain on a broken telephone pole. It said, Mulbury's Historic Downtown. Wow, that's fitting, I said to myself aloud. Everything in this damn town is just abandoned or neglected. How is this even still a town? When I reached the downtown area, the old brick 1 to 2 story structures looked haggard and unkempt. The place was an absolute shithole. My stomach grumbled again. Ugh, I bet they don't even have a diner here. I've seen 0 people, and I swear I was the only car that was in this town. I came to a 4-way stop that held a small detour sign pointing to the right. I sat there and looked left, then right. And just as I suspected, nothing. No one, nada. I looked to my left again out of habit. You know, the final look before you take the turn. I nearly jumped out of my seat as I let out a scream. Holy shit! There was someone standing at the 4-way stop. Well, at least I thought there was. As quickly as I saw them, they just seemed to vanish. It looked to be a small and slender man. He had an old, worn-out straw hat on, and his clothes were in ruins. Scary enough as this was, what really freaked me out was that his face was just gone. It looked like it had just been ripped off. There wasn't even a front view of his skull, just a bloody mess leading straight into the cranial cavity. But he wasn't there, was he? I stared at the spot that I just saw him. There was nothing there. Okay, fuck this town. I have had enough, and I was getting the hell out of here. I hit the gas and I took the turn hard and fast. As I did, my car jostled hard. I felt the back passenger side of the car sink and then jump back up violently. There was a loud pop, and my car began to limp. Jesus Christ! I yelled out. I must have hit a massive pothole. First, a fucking cow, and now I hit a crater in the earth. I stopped the car, not even worrying about pulling over. There was no one in this forsaken town except for no-face McGuckin back there. I leaned forward and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. I sat there like that for probably a minute, just breathing in and out, trying to get my mind right. This was just my damn luck. There came a loud knock at my driver's side window. My eyes shot open and I swung my head to see who was there. There wasn't anyone. I heard a knock. Hell, it was so loud and hard, I felt that knock. I peered out of my side mirror just knowing that no-face McGuckin would be there, staring at me with his no face. Would that be considered staring? I mean, he doesn't have eyes or a face, so maybe he would just be standing there? I shook my head and scolded myself. Dude, you are literally in a nightmare and you can't keep your thoughts straight for 1 second. I looked in my side mirror again. He wasn't there. No one was there. Just an empty street and what appeared to be a pothole that would lead to the center of the earth. If I hadn't have been so scared shitless, I would have seen this thing. It was impossible to miss. I bet the space station could see it every time they flew by. I let out a deep sigh. I had to do something. I'm not sure if I had a spare tire, so I might have to find a repair shop. But where? I grabbed my phone. I went to open Google and searched for a shop near me, but I had no service at all. No 5G, no 4G LTE, not even 2G. I was so screwed. I threw my phone down and just stared out the front window. The sun was almost set now. The amber and gold glows of the final moments of its descent behind the earth painted the skyline. So now, not only was I apparently stranded here, but I was going to be in this weird ghost town at night. I did not want to stay in this town overnight. No fucking way in hell. I flipped my hazards on, turned off the vehicle, and stepped onto the old brick road. I stared at the pothole and gave it the middle finger. I went to open my trunk and search for a spare tire when I noticed a glint from within the pothole itself. Well, that's odd, I thought. I moved my head in different angles, and as I did so, I noticed more and more sparkles appeared. What the hell is that? I began to walk towards the pothole, and what I saw simultaneously pissed me off and sent a jolt of fear through my body. There were sharpened rebar spikes securely fastened to a cement pour within this hole. Someone had intentionally done this. Most of the rebar was rusted except for the newly sharpened tips that gleamed in the fading sun. I began to turn and run back to the car when the wind picked up around me. I hear what sounded like footsteps on brick approaching me from every angle. Lots of footsteps. The hair on the back of my neck began to stand and cold chills swept my body. I spun my head back and forth, my eyes widening in fear. The footsteps kept coming, but there wasn't anyone around. I was losing it. I was having auditory hallucinations. It had to be from all the stress I just endured. I worked on calming myself. I turned back towards my car and began to slowly walk towards it, controlling my breathing with every step. I got to the trunk of the car and stood there frozen, just staring into the distance. An ominous foreboding swept me as my body began to go numb. I could see at the end of the long road in front of me that the last bit of sun began to set. There was a small flash of green, and then they appeared. In an instant, they came into view. Hundreds or thousands of dead, ambling apparitions. They surrounded me on all sides. They all spoke in unison, but I couldn't hear anything that they were saying. None of it made sense. Some had etched fear on their face, others anger and disgust. I saw one ghostly small child sitting in the road, rocking back and forth, sobbing. None of this made sense. None of this had to be real, but it was. I screamed as the figures closed in on me, hands reaching out, teeth gnashing, and the ever-present hum of too many conversations. I swung out to strike one, thinking my fist would fly right through the face, but it didn't. My punch landed hard in the face of the grotesque man in front of me. His jaw fell loosely from his mouth, and an odor I had never smelled emitted from him. I gagged and I began to rub my hand from the pain of the impact. I had to do something. They were closing in too fast. I couldn't even make it to my car at this point. They were crawling up and over it. I began to run in the direction that I thought was the thinnest of the group. Moving as hard and as fast as I could, I ran straight at the group of maybe 20 ghouls. Right before impact, no-faced McGuckin stepped into my view holding an old harvesting sigh. My breath caught in my throat, but I lowered my head as if to truck right through the man. I slammed into him and the front line of the monsters, only for my momentum to be immediately stopped. I could feel them begin to grip every part of my body. I was swept off my feet and pulled down to the ground. No-Face was there, now standing over me. He raised the tool in his hand and he swung it straight down into my abdomen. The pain was so immense. I tried to scream, but nothing came out as one of the ghouls bit into and tore out my throat. I could feel tension on my right arm as it was being pulled hard. Then a hot radiating pain as my shoulder was pulled from its socket. I could hear the flesh beginning to rip and the tendons in my shoulder popping as the arm slowly gave away. My body began to go into shock. I watched as my arm was unceremoniously removed from my body and held above me as 3 creatures ate it. Blood splattered out and down my face. I began to convulse on the ground as more blood came up and out of my mouth. No Face then took the scythe and ran it laterally across my midsection. When he was done, he just stepped over me and began to walk away. My vision began to dim, but I was able to watch as my intestines were held in the air and chewed on. Coldness swept my body and my breathing slowed. The world began to fade to black, and darkness took hold of my sight, but the noises were still there. The noises of my body being consumed by creatures unimaginable. The feasting began to slowly die out and a flash of white light rushed in. I took a loud, gasping drink of air. I was standing again. It was daylight. The hazard lights of my car were still on and flashing. I grabbed my stomach to find that there wasn't a large wound there. Then I realized that I still had my right arm. Wild-eyed and feeling crazy, I began to laugh, then cry, and then laugh again. I had totally lost my mind. I was insane. That's it. I was insane. That is the only thing that could explain any of this. I had to just get my ass out of this town and get home. And after that, I would be scheduling an appointment with my psychiatrist. I began to walk towards my car when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and slowly turned to see 3 men and 1 small girl. She was maybe 12, and they were walking towards a spot on the road. They stopped and formed a circle. I yelled out to them, "Hey! Hey! Can you help me?" They didn't acknowledge me. They just stared at the ground. I began to walk towards them, raising my hand and waving in an attempt to get their attention. Still, nothing. I walked up to them and tried to push one of the men to get his attention, but I fell right through him, flat on my stomach. I let out a groan and opened my eyes to see me staring back at myself. My face was etched in a horrified scream and my eyes were wide. Blood pooled around my face and my body was gone. I shut up quickly and I screamed. Backing away from my corpse, I fell on my ass hard on the ground. I gripped my hair and I pulled at it. I was dead. I was fucking dead in this town, and now I'm a ghost or one of those things that killed me. I looked up at the group of people to see that the girl was staring at me. She had a knowing smirk on her lips and eyes that penetrated into the very essence of me. She gave me a wink, and 2 of the men picked up my body. The 3rd man got in my car and drove away. Then the girl began to laugh. She laughed and laughed and laughed. Sound echoed in my head, reverberating off the walls in my mind. I slammed my eyes shut and began to cry. A loud crash noise broke me from my sorrow. I shot up to see an SUV slam into and pop up from the pothole in the ground. How long was I sitting here? The grass around me looked taller somehow, and the sun was beginning to set again. I looked around to find that the girl and the other men were gone now. Maybe time works differently for the dead. I'm not sure. The SUV limped along the road, and I could see that both the front and rear passenger side tires were blown. It stopped, and a man jumped out of the driver's seat, slinging a flurry of curses. He walked over to the passenger side and looked at the damage on his tires. He just stood there, shaking his head and shooting quick glances towards the 4-way stop. Did he see Mr. No-Face too? The front passenger door opened and a middle-aged red-headed woman stepped out. Concern and maybe fear were etched on her face. Her and the man had a short conversation and she ducked her head back into the car to talk to someone in the back seat. I stood and started to walk over to them, my footsteps echoing on the brick road. The man stopped and swung his head around in my direction. His eyes were wide. He looked like a wild animal ready to pounce. I stood stark still as he looked all around me and then right through me. I leaned my head around to peer into the back of the SUV. Even at this distance, I could see a teenage boy and a small toddler sitting in the back seat. A wind picked up around me, wafted the scent of the family in my direction. I began to salivate, and my breath became heavy. I stared off into the distance to see the sun begin its final descent behind the horizon. There was a green flash, and then it was dark. and I was hungry. Really hungry.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to have an extra bonus episode a month and access to the interdimensional radio station, subscribe to the Nightmare Trials either on Spotify or on Patreon. For the Patreon subscribers, you will need to type in patreon.com/the Nightmare Trials. The cost for the subscription is only $5 per month, and your contribution helps us continue with creating quality content. Further, make your way to Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram to add the Nightmare Trials to your socials. We like to do giveaways, post short video content, and we love to engage with our listeners. We will see you next week with a new episode. Until we meet again.